Obviously, the house is a grand example of Italianate Renaissance.
It's like any other disappointment, but once you take a deep breath, think about it, and start working on it, because we were afraid we wouldn't know how to do this.
Certainly our goal is, to get back to where we were, but we know that takes time and effort, but we know it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Maxwell Richardson built the house, this part of it, in 1870, and he was the son of a wealthy landowner, and he, Max himself, became an attorney and held several properties for rental and was twice mayor of Oswego. So he really did represent the upper crust, if you will, of society at that point in time.
There was a smaller house next door that they lived in first, and it wasn't quite the right house for their place in society, because they had moved their way up in that. Their son, Maxwell, became the man of the house when he was 16 years old, because that's when his father passed away. And he lived here with his mother and his sister, who had been divorced, which at that time, of course, was not an acceptable thing. And she emotionally, had a difficult time with all of that. And so she spent most of her life here in the house, until she passed away. And her son, Norman, also lived here as well.
The furnishings are really an accumulation of Max Richardson's many travels around the world. He would go to Europe for 3 or 4 months at a time and buy paintings or whatever and bring them back and have them mounted on the wall. The style at the time, as you can see, was to put as many paintings as you could in a row, just to demonstrate to the community that you had a lot of money to buy a lot of paintings. The furniture was all specifically designed by a very high caliber designer in New York City at the time. They actually came up here and designed this furniture for this room, as well as the drapes. So everything was really premeditated and beautifully done for the era. The New York State Council of the Arts did in fact fund us on an annual basis, and it had been ongoing for a long time. As with many other state funds, it totally dried up. So I would gather that there are very few agencies at all in New York State that are getting called NYSCA, New York State Council on the Arts funding these days.
The funding that we received from the state relied heavily upon matching grants, and if you don't have the finances to match, then you lose those grants. The other problem with the grants that are out there is you have to be open a minimum of hours a year, and if you're only open 3 days a week, it doesn't usually meet the criteria for the grant. So it's kind of a catch-22 in many different ways with the grant funding.
Well, I know the funding that we used to receive from the county, Oswego County, and as it turned out, I happened to work there at that time. They had some very big financial problems, and one of the ways that they tried to get caught up with that and passed it was to cut out all of the funding that they gave to nonprofit organizations. And at that time, we were getting $50,000 a year from them. And when you go from 50 to 0, it has some effect on what you're trying to do.
It's a huge expense. I mean, I just paid the utility bill for last month, and it was $1,900 for 1 month.
The initial loss of money in 2003 was a significant shock, and something that we certainly weren't prepared for, and a lot of people who were in the same position as we were not prepared for. And luckily, we did have some reserve. We were pretty conservative over the years, and so that did help.
It's so difficult when you believe in something and you're a cheerleader for it, and it's easy to do because you believe in it and recognize its importance in the community and all that, that they could do such a thing, As a taxpayer even, it was like, I'd like some of my money as a taxpayer to help these kind of organizations,
Well, the biggest blow to our society was that we lost our director/curator that had been here for about 25 years, who was clearly an expert on this building as well as all of New York State. I mean, his grasp of the history of New York was just phenomenal. So it was a major blow to us personally as board members, but also to the community that we had to let him go. We no longer could pay him.
We have one part-time employee who, thank God, loves this house, and we pay him this much, you know. But fortunately, he loves it and takes good care of the house and the yard, and so we pay him. But the rest of it's all done by volunteers. Just about 10 years ago, I retired, and it lasted for 4 weeks before I got the part-time job that I've now had for 10 years. It's hard for young people to understand that, but I'd worked every day of my life, and not to have that structure anymore was difficult for me, because I get up in the morning, take a shower, get dressed, go to work, you know, which is good for me.
A friend of mine was on the board, and way back there in the 70s said, wouldn't you like a project to get involved in the community? And so I said, sure. And so I joined and been really heavily involved ever since.
There are things we'd love to do in this house. We had a painting that had fallen, and the frame was broken, and it was off the wall for 15 years, I think, and then raised some money and put in the rest of it and had it fixed and cleaned as well, which cost about $3,000. And now it looks so nice and bright there. The other ones don't look so clean, you know, but that's not, you know, that's way down here compared to paying the heat in the winter and fixing things so, you know, the wall doesn't fall down or something, you know. So those things are much higher in the list now.
We've had chronic roof issues because the roof is copper and it's the original roof, so it's 140 years old. It's amazing that it's held up, and it really has, but we have really paid very close attention to it, knowing that the roof is the core of the existence of the building. The skylight that's in the lobby is also an area where we've had lots of concern. Finally, we have achieved that it does not leak, but having a flat surface in Oswego for the winter is, as you might suspect, a challenge all the time.
You know, the house isn't traditionally insulated. We don't have storm windows. We don't have the modern exterior, and we don't have the maintenance-free issues that some of the modern houses might have, you know.
When you make yourself think about it and say, well, let's do one thing at a time. And we started doing that. We had some new windows put in the front upstairs, which really helped our utility bill after that, and some also in the basement. And then we had somebody in the wooden part of the house last year go up, scrape, and paint. Thank goodness none of it hadn't gone so far as the wood was, you know, was rotted out or anything. And so now we're looking at another part that needs to be done, and having someone to come and look at it. And then we'll start to apply for some help, some grant money and things for that as well.
Right now we have one major fundraiser that we've been doing for over 25 years, and that is the annual Not So Silent auction.
We get some paintings, which are always beautiful. I've bought a few for my house. We have gift certificates from local businesses as well. My husband always buys the restaurant ones. Those kinds of things. And they're always, like, the range of prices is really vast. You know, some of them are very inexpensive, some of them, so that everybody who comes can bid on them and buy something.
We really get no money from exterior sources other than through fundraising and asking for annual memberships and things of that sort. And we also charge for tours of the building. So that's how we sustain it.
We've just sent out letters asking for sponsorship of this auction that we're having. And of course, every nonprofit in this whole area goes to those, you know, and so you have to understand when one of them sends a letter back and says, we're not doing it, because they're helping someone else this time, and you have to understand that because they're all in the same shape we are as far as trying to survive, you know, without a lot of money. You know, the worst that can happen is they'll say no, but they're not going to show up on your porch and say, here, let me give you something. You've got to go out and ask them. And the worst that can happen is they'll say no, but maybe they won't say no, you know. So I've used that so many times.
We understand that municipalities, the city, the county, the state, all have their fiscal issues. But in this day and age, the arts and museums are pretty much always the first things to go.
And when I call people up and I say my name, they always go, "Hi," like knowing full well that I'm going to ask for something, but usually they're very kind. And most of the time, like I go to the leadership class every year and teach a lesson on volunteerism. And one of the things that I use as far as getting volunteers and that sort of thing is this one woman I worked with at one time, and she was so great, and it was just wonderful. And I said to her when it was over, "You were just so great. I can't believe why didn't we ever work together before?" And she said, "No one ever asked me." And so if you ask people, almost everyone, if they can, they'll help you,
And we're not going to let it go unless we're kicking and screaming.